Hello. Welcome to the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show.
Welcome to a podcast show about stuff. It's the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show. Here's your host, Stephen Davis.
Welcome to the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show. Today, my guest, a 7-time Grammy nominee as a leader. He's a noted drummer, percussionist, composer, arranger, conductor, producer, documentary filmmaker, and a band leader. But most importantly for me is that he is an educator. Welcome to my guest, the masterful Bobby Sanabria. Hey, Bobby, how you doing?
Hey, Stephen, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my thoughts.
I appreciate you coming on. We're going to have a nice time. Now, as I always tell my guests, and I usually tell them beforehand, but I'm going to tell you now, this is not a got you show. And what I want to do is have a conversation with you. This is not an interview, it's a conversation. Okay?
Sure.
So I'm going to go way back in your memory.
Okay.
I always start off with, where were you born at in this world?
I was born on June 2nd, 1957 in the South Bronx in New York City in a hospital called St. Francis that no longer exists. My parents are from Puerto Rico. They met here in New York City. My father, Jose, from the city of Guanica, and my mother from the city of Goa, which interestingly enough, they're both sugar refining. They were both sugar refining towns. Yabucoa is on the east coast, and Guanica is very famous. It's toward the middle of the island on the west, and so Guanica is very famous because that's where the Americans invaded in 1898, and that's how Puerto Rico became a possession of the United States. But that's a whole nother story. But I was born in the South Bronx. I'm born and bred. So I'm what they call a New Yorican.
New Yorican, okay. Do you have siblings?
Yes, my sister's name is Joanne.
She older or younger?
She's younger than me. She's been living in Chicago for the last almost 30 years now. She grew up with me we grew up in the Melrose Projects in the South Bronx.
Oh, the Melrose Projects. I remember those projects. I think I've had some friends that lived in those projects. My grandparents on both sides, my mother's mother and my grandfather lived in the Stephen Foster projects.
Okay.
On 115th Street. They were the first ones to move into those projects.
Wow. My parents, the Melrose Projects, the main one is the building I grew up in, 681 on the corner, East 153rd and Cortlandt Avenue in the South Bronx. They were one of the first families to move in as well. As the projects were a step up for anybody that was living in tenements at the time.
It was. And as a matter of fact, my grandmother and grandfather were in the 1952 Daily News as being the first tenants.
Wow.
Pictures of them moving
Fantastic. Yeah, wow.
And my other grandmother lived on 131st Street, but she didn't live in the projects, but she lived around the corner from the projects on 132nd Street.
There you go.
And that's where the Wayne brothers grew up at.
Wow. So they're Harlemites through and through. So.
Yes. Now, tell us a little bit more about your mother and father.
My father, Jose, I mentioned he was from Guanica. He came here when he was a teenager, went to Morris High School. Then he went to, which interesting enough, Morris High School was the most integrated school high school in the United States in the 1950s. People talk about the civil rights movement and everything. That was already happening in New York, particularly in the Bronx. He went to Morris High School for a semester or two, and then he transferred to a school called Bronx Vocational High School, which is also known as Alfred E. Smith High School, and he learned the trade of machinist. And that's what he was. And then later on in life, after being a machinist for many years, he got an opportunity to work for the U.S. Postal Service and became a sorter in the U.S. Postal Service. He had an interesting life, to say the least. But he was a great lover of music, and he passed it on to me because the factory that he worked at, the company that he worked at as a machinist, was in Valley Stream, Long Island, believe it or not. So it took him 2 hours to get there by train and 2 hours to get back. So his ritual was to sit in a lazy boy chair in the living room, listen to music. And my mother would tell me, if you want to go over there, do your homework and listen to the music your father's listening to. So he listened to everything from Harry Belafonte, live at Carnegie Hall, to the great pianist Ahmad Jamal, to the great Latin big bands of Machito, Tito Puente, Tito Rodriguez, all the great pop music. He was into the Temptations, the Four Tops, James Brown, everything and anything in between. That's why I call my big band the Multiverse Big Band, because he passed that on to me, that love of great music and not having any musical boundaries. I remember when I was a kid, he brought home a record by Sergio Mendes in Brazil 66 called Mais Que Nada, which is a Brazilian tune by Jorge Ben. And I listened to that 45. I kept playing it over and over again because I was just enthralled by it. And my mother told my father, you better check with your son because I think he's autistic. He just keeps playing that record over and over again. And he told her in Spanish, wait a minute now, let me see what's going on. So he was watching me and I didn't notice at the time. Then I turned around, I noticed he was watching me, he started smiling. He goes, why do you like the record so much? I go, the rhythm and they're singing, but it isn't, it sounds like Spanish, but it isn't. He goes, I'll tell you why you like the music so much. It's because of the rhythm. He goes, get the globe. I get the globe. And he starts showing me. He goes, the rhythm that we all utilize or use in all the countries in Latin America and this country, Brazil, all of it comes from Africa. And he points to Africa. Then he points to Spain, Portugal. So he's giving me a little history lessons and socio-political lesson too. He starts talking about the slave trade. Oh, it was ridiculous. I'm like 8 years old, and he's telling me all this heavy stuff. So he said, that's why you like the music so much, the rhythm. And the language is Portuguese.
That's just the theme of this show is progress despite obstacles. And it seemed that while your father might have had obstacles in terms of the everyday things that happen at that particular period of time, he took time to talk with you, not just pat you on the head and say, I'm feeding you, but he's talking to you as an adult.
Right.
And that's wonderful. What about your mother?
My mom was a housewife. That's what she did. And she was protecting us as much as she could from the craziness that was happening in the South Bronx at the time, as you well know, back in the 60s and going into the 70s. Heroin was rampant. A lot of GIs were coming back from Vietnam as junkies. And the city, the government officials, through malfeasance, the city went bankrupt. Many police officers were laid off. Crime was running rampant. The rise of street gangs started happening again, this, that, and the other. Any other mother trying to protect us from all of that kind of stuff and looking out for us all the time. But then it was interesting. My mother really learned how to speak English through me because she just spoke Spanish. My father spoke English well because he had gone to high school here. But my mother when she came from Puerto Rico, she had already graduated high school, and she, excuse me, she didn't learn English or knew it very little. And when she spoke with a heavy accent, she started volunteering. A friend in the building told her, "Hey, Juanita, you like to help people out and this and that. Why don't you volunteer for an after-school program they're doing at the public school, PS1, across the street from the building, 681, where you live?" So she started doing that. And then she got an opportunity to become a paraprofessional and get paid for that work, that initial work that she was doing, helping kids in an after-school program. And through that, I used to help her out doing lesson plans and everything. And she learned really how to speak English through me. And it was funny sometimes, certain words, the way she would mispronounce them, especially the word sheet, the way she pronounced it. And I said, "No, Ma, you know what you're saying? You're saying something that you do when you go to the bathroom." He goes, "No, I'm saying it correctly." He goes, "No, you're not. You got to work on the pronunciation." So anyway, so she did that for many years, and she wound up working with children that were mentally unstable, and also children that had learning disabilities. She just had a way with kids that everybody noticed and loved, and in turn they loved her as well. She could get to a kid that was shut down. Maybe the kid was abused at home or whatever. She'd be able to get them to open up and help them. That's my father, Jose. He taught me about all this incredible music, exposed me to it, and my mother, Juanita, gave me that loving spirit. But also, my mother had a very fiery personality. She wouldn't take guff from anybody, and she passed that on to me. Oh, the mothers in New York City from that time period, especially African American mothers, Puerto Rican mothers, Italian mothers, Irish mothers. I remember these communities still all coexisted in the South Bronx at the time, and people from the Jewish community too. The mothers were very important in terms of helping us to survive and eventually thrive.
One of the things that I'm always reminded of is how, while we might have come from different parts of the world, the reason why New York was so special, especially in that time, even with all the stuff that was going on, is that we all came from a similar background, and we came to New York to do better.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We came to New York to do better, and we had a similar leaving wherever we were to come to New York, to go into those areas in New York and work hard, so especially fathers like your father's father in particular, your father, in terms of leaving his family behind to come here because he wanted a better life for whoever his offspring would be. So that's always impressed me. And sometimes we need to think about that when we are going back and forth with each other, because we're all the same.
Right. I think the most striking thing that I've learned from looking back at that time period is that the people in all the communities that I mentioned, especially in particular, the Puerto Rican and African American community, because we developed a very special bond in the South Bronx, and especially in East and West Harlem, is that the people were working class, but they had middle class values.
Yes.
They wanted their kids to succeed and go to college, and they knew that education was the ticket, the way out of what we call today the hood. The hood there's nothing wrong with the hood. The hood gives you strength. It teaches you how to survive. It teaches you, but if you want to really make something of yourself, you have to get to the next level. And the next level for the sons and daughters of these working class people was getting to college. I was the first person in my family to go to college and graduate.
First, I want to talk about because I'm going to lead up to your college and beyond, but I want to talk about your elementary years. Where did you go to elementary school at?
Oh, I went to first PS1, which was a building. It's funny. They used to be right across the street from the project I grew up in. The building was a police athletic league. And so that got torn down. Everybody in the neighborhood, I was very young, so I don't remember much, but I know people were mad about that. But they replaced it with a public school, which is PS1. I saw it being constructed right before my very eyes as a little boy. I went there for kindergarten, and then after kindergarten, from the 1st to the 5th grade, I went to a Catholic school known as Immaculate Conception, which was a few blocks away, and on East 150th, between East 150th Street. And that happens to be the oldest Catholic school in the Bronx. It's over 150 years old. In any case, from there, I went from the 6th grade to the 8th grade. I went to a school for gifted children called Monsignor William R. Kelly. For your viewers, parochial school was a common thing for many Puerto Rican families in New York City to send their kids to, because for the most part, Puerto Rican families are Catholic, and they wanted to have their kids experience the discipline of that environment, and it was in keeping with their religious beliefs. Many African American families did the same thing as well. In any case, but you had to pay for that. There was tuition involved. And by today's standards, it wasn't much, but most people didn't make a lot of money back then. So people really struggled to make ends meet so that they could send their kids to those types of schools. In any case, in the 5th grade, since my grades were so good, I was offered the opportunity to take an exam for an experimental school run by Franciscan brothers in Manhattan called Monsignor William R. Kelly. The good thing about that was if you passed the exam and the interview, you went to the school and it was tuition free. So it was an opportunity for me and also an opportunity to take some burden off of my parents. At first, I didn't want to go because I wanted to stay in the neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. But then I realized everybody telling me, et cetera, that it would be great because not only would it alleviate that financial burden, but you learn a lot of new things. And the new things that I learned about were incredible because we took high school and college courses from the 6th to the 8th grade. I'm a little kid in the 6th grade and I'm taking political science. I didn't even know what political science was. My mother asked me, ¿Qué es la ciencia política? ¿Qué es eso? What is that? Political science. I told her in my own ignorant way, I guess it's the science of politics. I don't know. Then we had a discussion. What do you mean? There's a science to politics? They're all corrupt anyway. I said, Ma, I'll find out. I'll give you the 411 when I start taking the class. And we took biology.
During that time, were you exhibiting, aside from listening to your father's music, were you exhibiting signs that of your wanting to participate in music itself?
Oh, yeah. You see it in the South Bronx and South Brooklyn and also in East Harlem in New York City, wherever there was a Puerto Rican community, you would hear people playing conga drums in the summertime. That was like the soundtrack of my life when I was a little kid, playing Cuban rumba, which is drums and voices and dance. So you'd hear that rhythm at night, starting in early evening, going into the wee hours of the night in the summertime. It was amazing. If you closed your eyes, you thought you were in Cuba or in Puerto Rico or any of the other Spanish dominions in the Caribbean.
But let me tell you something funny about that. I want you to continue with that. But what's funny about that is in my life when I hear that music, because I always remember the song by Santana's brother.
Oh, Jorge Santana, yeah.
Yes, they had a hit song. That was what I heard at night.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I tell you, I'm preaching to the choir. The bond between the Black and Puerto Rican community was a deep one. And it was interesting too, because we have our own forms of music on the island, my ancestral homeland, particularly an Afro-Puerto Rican style known as bomba that's played on barrel drums covered with goatskin, and another style called plena, which is played on frame drums covered with goatskin. But the Puerto Rican community in New York City had adopted and adapted and contributed to the history of Cuban music mightily, because when Puerto Ricans came from the island to New York City, the main band that they heard was Machito and the Afro-Cubans, this incredible orchestra that started in 1939. And Cuba's influence on not only Puerto Rico, because it's a sister island to Cuba, but all of the Caribbean and Central South America, particularly New York, was ubiquitous at that time. So we Puerto Ricans, we adapted Cuban music, and today we call it salsa. People ask me, what's salsa? And I go, it's Cuban music played with a freaking New Yorican attitude, man. That's just the way it is. That rhythm, what I voiced out, guaguancó, which is part of the rumba tradition. There's various rhythms in the rumba tradition, but that particular rhythm, guaguancó, in what I vocalized, which is in a particular style, the Havana style, with that melody that I sang, was ubiquitous. And of course, there were many salsa bands. Salsa was the soundtrack of my life. It was the lingua franca of the streets back then, and Motown. You'd hear either one of those things coming out of bodegas or barbershops or candy stores when I was growing up. So I was very attracted to that. And I would go to see the conga players in the park, and I found that I could imitate what they were doing. You know how the old saying, watch, listen, and learn. So you learn by imitation. Then you'd ask questions, etc. But I was also being deeply enamored. I became deeply enamored with jazz, which is the highest form of art that this country has produced. It was invented by African Americans in New Orleans. And jazz, I found it to be super hip. In the beginning, I didn't know it was jazz because I had been bombarded by it by watching cartoons. There was jazz in every single cartoon when I was growing up. The Flintstones, Johnny Quest, the Jetsons, Top Cat, all those cartoons had jazz in them, because later on I found out the guy that wrote all the music for them was a gentleman by the name of Hoyt Curtin, who was a jazz piano player. So then little by little, I started seeing people like Duke Ellington, Count Basie on the Ed Sullivan Show. Then later on, I saw drummers like Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson, Gene Krupa, Sonny Payne, these incredible big band drummers. And I was very attracted to that. Like everybody my age at that time, we were exposed to the Beatles, and we dug that too. But when I saw what Buddy Rich or Sonny Payne was doing, when I saw what Sonny Payne was doing with the Count Basie Orchestra on TV, I said, this is a far cry from what Ringo is doing with the Beatles, man, on drums. They're like doing solos, kicking the figures with the band, with the brass and everything. It was exciting to me. And then I saw Tito Puente when I was 12 years old in an outdoor concert right in front of my building. That was it. I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So
he used to live on 115th, 116th Street, didn't he?
He lived on 110th and Fifth Avenue, then 111th. He lived in various addresses in Spanish Harlem. And for those of you who are watching, going, what's Spanish Harlem? That's like 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th Avenue, Madison Park, 5th. Those avenues from like 96 to about 125th Street. That's East Harlem, which became known as Spanish Harlem. And on 116th Street, there's a small section still left there of Italians that were part of the mix. But that became known as Spanish Harlem with the Great Migration. What became known as the Great Migration. You had the Great Migration from down south with blacks, and then you had the Great Migration from Puerto Rico. And that started happening in the 30s, but going back to the 20s, but it really went into full force right after World War II, because before everybody came by boat, and then after World War II, people started coming to New York by plane. So that was really the big explosion. And for those of your viewers that don't know, people in Harlem, the South Bronx became an extension of Harlem, because there were affordable homes that were available to working class people, and people migrated. You just have to follow the subway lines, the 2, the 5, the 6, and the D train. You'll see how people migrated to the South Bronx.
Which is funny, because I know what you're saying to be true, because I lived through that and understood. We were right across the street from Spanish Harlem, 115th Street. But even today, what you're seeing is remnants of that still.
It's the things have changed. There's a big Mexican community now in what we call Spanish Harlem. The Puerto Rican community has diminished in size. There's a big influx of the Dominican community, our Dominican brothers and sisters, and various other peoples from, especially West Africa, the Middle East. But it's all part and parcel of the immigrant experience of New York. In our case, with Puerto Ricans, it's a little bit strange, because since 1917, we've been citizens of the United States through the Jones Act. But people still treated us, my parents especially, like they were immigrants and not Americans. It's like that line in West Side Story where Bernardo is on the rooftop arguing with his girlfriend, Anita, and they're going back and forth. And we call that in Puerto Rico a controversia, a controversy. But it's done in a musical way. Anita keeps,
and they burst into America, right?
Yeah. And so he say everything's all right in America. Anita says that, but then Bernardo responds, yeah, if you're all white in America. And then he goes, Puerto Rico is in America because we're citizens. And then she goes, yeah, but you forget I'm in America.
That trumps everything, right?
Yeah. So it's a very fascinating, the lyrical content of that song. I know it's controversial, but you really, if you get into the nuts and bolts of it, I remember when I saw the movie when I was a little kid, I was like stunned when he responded to saying, when she said, everything's all right in America, and he goes, yeah, if you're all white in America. And that was deep, especially.
The funny part about that is, I'm going to ask you about your high school. The funny part about that is Bernardo, the person that portrayed Bernardo, was not Puerto Rican.
Right, he was Greek. Yeah, he was Greek. Oh man, it's so out there. But there weren't that many. It was very difficult at that time because Chita Rivera says there weren't that many qualified actors. First of all, for West Side Story, that was the first time that you had to be a triple threat. You had to be able to act, sing, and dance. Now, people that could do that goes back to the days of vaudeville. You could find people like that, but the way they had to sing at that time for the music was very difficult because the intervals in the music were very modern, atonal, and they're coming from jazz. And at times you had to sing like an opera singer as well. And then you had to do all this new type of choreography that Jerome Robbins had come up with. And then you had to act as well. It was like a groundbreaking musical on so many levels. There weren't that many Latino actors let alone Puerto Ricans to begin with. And Rita Moreno, she says herself that when she found out about it, she for a month straight before her audition, she took dance classes to beef up her skills and this, that, and the other. So we're glad that she represented us mightily in the film. She actually, her family is from my mother. My mother's from a city called Yabucoa in Puerto Rico. And she happens to be from the town over, Humacao, her family. And I've gotten to meet her, and she's an incredibly classy lady, still gorgeous. And she's got all her wits about her, man. Great conversation.
Being 90 years old.
Amazing woman, and a pioneer for civil rights, because she really, as you well know, she marched on Washington, on the March on Washington with Dr. King, and she was always talking about giving talks to the Puerto Rican community and telling kids, you got to go to school, you got to go to college, etc., finish your education. And she was always proud to say she was Puerto Rican. So there you go.
Now, what high school did you go to?
After I graduated, the interesting thing about Monsignor William R. Kelly was, getting back to that, the school was in Manhattan. So I had to travel every day by subway to the 86th Street stop on the number 1 train and walk 3 blocks to 83rd Street between Broadway and Amsterdam. So it was, for a little kid at that time, it was deep, man. I had to, it was crazy back then because, as you well know, the crime and everything else, I got into a few situations where I had to fight myself out of them, etc., and defend myself. But it was great because it built my character. It made me independent and exposed me to these incredible subjects that I knew nothing about. I was taking chemistry, biology in the 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, political science, world history. I was taking, I even took a film course, a course on film. So they were showing us films by Luis Buñuel and all these great directors from Germany, foreign films, this, that, and the other. It was an amazing time period for me. But then I went to Cardinal Hayes High School in the South Bronx, which is the high school Martin Scorsese went to, just to give you a reference point. And the reason I picked that school was because it was like 4 blocks away from where I grew up. So I could walk to it. I was done with taking the subway every day and waking up so early in the morning, etc. So I went there.
What were your experiences while you were in high school? Did you play music while you were in high school?
Yes, I met a gentleman by the name of Mr. William Ryan. He was my high school band director, and he was he was another person responsible for me being the musician I am today, besides my father. And he showed me what it was to be a professional musician. My senior year, a gentleman by the name of David Carmona, who was a fellow student in the high school band, he played trumpet. He hit me to the Berklee College of Music, which I knew nothing about. And then I found out through him it was the best institution for jazz education in the world, etc. So Mr. William Ryan found out that we wanted to audition. And he started laughing. He goes, Sanabria, you and Carmona, you'll never pass the theory test, because it was an audition on your instrument, but you also had to pass a theory test at the time to get into the school. And we were looking at each other. Well, what do you mean? He goes, do you know what a harmonic minor scale is? Do you know what an Aeolian scale is? Do you know what a C minor 7th chord is? And we were looking at each other. No. Meanwhile, we were already playing in local bands in the salsa.
Did you play in bands because of girls? Like
no, I know that
I went into a band because of girls. I didn't stay in the band very long because that was not my focus.
Believe it or not, I just fell in love with music, and the girl thing was was an addendum to that. But that's another story. But he said to us, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. If you behave yourselves and stay out of detention, I'll teach you for a half hour after school or an hour, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I'll teach you theory and bone you up on that. And he did, and we were able to pass the exam because of that. I'm always grateful to him for his kindness in that respect. Because we were the only ones in band class that were serious about being musicians.
And then where did you tell people where you went to college at?
This was the Berklee College of Music in Boston. Yeah.
And you had
believe it or not,
really bad, didn't
what?
You had the music bug really bad.
Oh, forget it. I was pretty good in track and field my freshman year. In fact, I was basically all city in freshman year. I broke 5 minutes in the mile. I was a good middle distance runner, quarter mile, half mile, and mile. And I had a little bit of celebrity status at the school because of that. But at that time, I just became so enthralled with music, and I gave up on track my sophomore year, to the disappointment of Mr. Robinson, Ed Robinson, he was African American, and let's say he spoke with a forked tongue sometimes. And he goes to me, Sanabria, what the F are you doing, like this, that, and the other? I remember I used to run against a guy in freshman year, Matt Sensuitz, who went to Power Memorial High School. And we used to come in first, second, and there was a gentleman that went to Rice High School, Eon Sweet, who was Jamaican. And we would come in first, second, or third in the mile. We were always fighting each other every week. And Matt went on to become an Olympian. He went to the Olympics, and then he became a college track coach. And his son became an Olympic gold medalist in the mile and middle distance. So the fact that but that's when Mr. Robinson said, what the F are you doing? He foresaw the future. He said, you're this good, you could be. And I said, no, let those guys do that. That's not my, as we say in Spanish, meta. Meta is path. My path is this. And I tell students when I give educational clinics, I go, try to find out by the time you're in high school what you're passionate about. If you're passionate, you'll succeed. And a lot of times I meet young people, they just don't know what they want to do. And that's for a variety of reasons, but I tell them, you got to focus. You got to find something that you love. It might be, I start asking them questions. I go, do you like to draw? Do you like films? Do you like this, that, the other? Do you like to dance? These are possibilities for you to have a career. So, but you have to become passionate, especially if you're in the arts. You have to be passionate about the journey, because the journey is really the be all and end all. I'm a very successful musician, but it's the journey that it was the most important part of it.
So true. So true. Now, what direction did Berklee point you into? And what are some of your experiences at Berklee?
There I met the third person that changed my life, which was an African-American drummer by the name of Mr. Keith Copeland, who no longer is alive. It's funny, all these three people that I mentioned, my father, Mr. Ryan, Mr. William Ryan, and Keith Copeland, all died within a year, in 1 year, months apart, a few years ago. Keith made me the drummer that I am today. The reason I'm able to do some of all the things that I do today as a drummer is because of Keith. He taught me how to swing. He taught me how to sight read music on the level of what we call a studio musician today. He taught me different styles of playing. He taught me what's known as coordinated independence and how to be a soloist, etc. He taught me how to give clinics, master classes, etc. He did all of that for me, and I'll forever be grateful. What the school did in general for me was made me the musician that I am today, because I became a composer and arranger, and the skills that I learned from the school made me learn all of the techniques that I utilize today to be a band leader. Okay, a successful one. So yeah, I'll be forever grateful to the school for that. And when I was at the school, believe it or not, my freshman year, I was the only Puerto Rican there at the school. And believe me, I looked. It was me, about 4 Brazilians, 1 Peruvian, and 1 Costa Rican, and that was it. And the Peruvian was a teacher, one of the teachers, and that was it. There were only 1, 2, 3, 4 African-American teachers at the school. Bob Chestnut, who was a saxophonist, tenor saxophonist and arranger, composer. Orville Wright, who was from Trinidad. He's still there, I believe. He might have retired. And Keith Copeland, who I mentioned, and James Williams, the late, great James Williams, the great jazz pianist. Those were the only 4 teachers of color there at the school. And so I was like a stranger in a strange land. Boston was very racist at the time. I remember not being in a diner, them not serving me. And I ask, and they go, "We don't serve any Portuguese here." And I go, "I'm not Portuguese. I'm Puerto Rican." They go, "That's even worse." But I always say, and I would get weekly, in my freshman year, I get weekly. In those days, it isn't like we had phones in every dormitory room, or we didn't have cell phones, obviously. You had a community phone in the hallway. It would ring, somebody would pick it up, they'd ask for somebody, and then that person would knock on your door. If it was for you, "Yo, Sanabria, you got a phone call." And I go to the phone, and they go to, "Is this Bobby is this Roberto Sanabria?" And I go, "Yeah. Can I help you?" And they'd say, "Go back to New York, you freaking spick," just like that. And then they'd hang up. I remember that would happen every week, once a week, when I was a freshman. And my roommate, David, the gentleman I mentioned before, David Carbone, piano, I go, "Who was that?" And I go, "Just a fan, man." So then they'd ask for him, and he'd come over. I go, "Who is that?" He goes, "You know that fan you said you have?" Because he's a fan of mine too.
Those was such.
But I always say, listen, that's nothing compared to what my African-American brothers and sisters have gone through. I suffered some racism in growing up in the South Bronx, because everything was territorial in New York at that time. If you walked in certain neighborhoods or down certain streets, they chase you. Tito Puente, I remember Tito Puente telling me when he studied drum set when he was a kid with a gentleman by the name of Mr. Williams. He doesn't remember his first name. He would walk across Lenox Avenue, which was the dividing line back then, the traditional dividing line between East and West Harlem, to take his drum lesson. And they chase him. And then they chase him on the way back. And I go, "Man, that sucked." He goes, "Nah, it was good, man, because I was working out. It built up my legs and everything for drumming with the pedals."
Now, what I wanted to ask you is that on your first noticeable audience performance, when you had to come out on the stage, and this is the first time that you were performing before an audience, how did you feel?
I remember being in a grammar school play when I was a kid and getting applause and all that stuff. When the first time I got applause was?
When?
I was in the first grade at Immaculate Conception. And I had pneumonia when I was a kid that year. I missed the first month of school. When I got into class, I was behind. And the nun, I always remember her, Sister Joanna. She was so loving, etc. And that week, there were some kids sitting in the lunchroom laughing. And I came over to them. I said, oh, let me sit with them. I was just getting to know everybody. You know how it is when you're new, trying to break into a group of kids that have bonded already after a month. So I went over and I said, hey, what's so funny? And nobody said anything. And then finally one of them said, what's so funny, you dumb spick? Just like that, man. It was shocking. First of all, I didn't know what the word meant, but I knew what dumb meant. So I just was taken aback. And it was a young Italian boy, I remember. And I said, I just responded by saying, I'm dumb. I speak 2 languages. How many do you speak? And that everybody started going, was in shock and started, yo, Sanabria, and started applauding.
That's how you do it.
That was the first time I got some applause. And then I had to go home. And my mother, she starts asking, how did it go today in school? And I go, I don't know, but they were like, this guy called me this word. And she goes, what word is that? I don't know. I don't even know what it means. I go, and I said it to her. And her eyes like went like this. And she started like shivering almost. And she started pulling me toward her and hugging me. She goes, don't, and she was like in tears, going, don't let anybody ever call you that. That is the worst thing that they can call you. They're trying to say that you're worthless and nothing, this, that, and the other. This was all in Spanish, and everything in Spanish sounds more dramatic or any foreign language. That's how I learned what that word meant. And she started telling me there's a lot of other nasty words that you're going to hear that people use to demean each other. And they say those things to take away your dignity. Don't let anybody ever take your dignity away. So that's what I'm talking about, that my mother was so strong. She was like, but then, as all mothers back then, this is like a universal thing. She goes, the next time somebody says that to you, you grab a bottle, a brick, or whatever you can find, and don't even say anything, and just, there you go. The law of the jungle, the law of the streets back then. Yeah. So
now, when you got out of college, what did you do?
When I got out of college, I was fortunate because I got called. I started teaching. When I got out of college, I started working with Mongo Santamaria, the great Cuban conga drummer, band leader, very ubiquitous, his name, not only in Latin music circles, but in jazz music circles.
Watermelon Man.
That's right. That was a hit for him. It was written by Herbie Hancock, who used to play piano for him. And that's where Mongo lived on, I believe, on Prospect Avenue in the South Bronx. Prospect Avenue in the South Bronx, a lot of Black Cubans used to live on that street. Just like on Lenox Avenue in Harlem, a lot of Black Cubans lived on Lenox Avenue. One of the reasons they lived there was because there was a bakery there between 115th and 116th Street called La Moderna, run by a Cuban gentleman by the name of Simon Jou, who was of Catalan descent.
I remember going to that bakery.
Yeah, everybody just used to call us, but he had a patio in the back, and all the Cuban drummers would go back there to play guaguancó, rumba, what I talked about before. And he was the only cat in the 30s and 40s that was selling percussion instruments from Cuba, like congas, timbales, bongos. You could buy them from him.
And right at the end of that block on 116th Street was where Malcolm X was at.
No kidding. Wow.
The mosque was right on top.
Wow. Amazing. There you go. Like our communities together, like always. So, excuse me. Like I said, it wasn't strange for my father to listen to a an artist from Puerto Rico like Ramito or Tito Puente or Tito Rodriguez, and also listen to the Four Tops or James Brown. I remember when
How long did you stay with Mongo Santamaria?
18 months, almost 2 years. And I got to record 2 albums with him. And then after him, I started working with a gentleman, very famous Puerto Rican trumpeter. Oh, and I must say with Mongo, it was a dream come true because that was the only gig where I could play authentic Cuban style timbales and also jazz drum set. And because that was what the gig required. And he couldn't, there was only a few guys that could do that. And I was one of them. Steve Barrios, the legend, who fellow native New Yorican, did the gig for 20 years or whatever. He would occasionally have spats with Mongo over money or whatever, leave, come back. But every time Steve would leave, they would have to get a drum set player and a timbala player. So where Steve did both. So when Mongo would play like a jazz funk tune, Steve would play drum set. And then when he played an authentic cha or jazz mambo, Steve goes to the timbales. So he couldn't get cats that could do both. So when I came along, I was able to do that. And I made a reputation for myself with that band. People got to know me because it was an elite thing to be in that band. And we got to travel all over Europe, all the jazz festivals, etc., all the jazz clubs across the United States. So it was great. And it was a dream come true for me because I had always wanted to play with him. And then at the same time, I was involved from the religious aspect in Santeria, which is the Cuban version of Ifa, which is the sacred religion from the Yoruba people in Nigeria that was brought to Cuba during the colonial period. So I was involved in that as a ceremonial drummer as well in different ceremonies in Brooklyn and the Bronx. And in this religious belief system, you have a padrino, a godfather, and you have a yubona, or iyubona, which is a godmother. And my godmother was Rosaleva at the time, who was Mongo's godmother. So everybody knew me on the scene. I had that instant, for whatever you want to call it, ghetto celebrity status, man, whatever, both on the street, on the bandstand, and in the religion. It was a great time period for me. And I learned a lot from Mongo as well. So
who are some of the who so our audience know, who are some of the people that you have played with over the years?
Oh, everybody and anybody in the world of jazz and Latin music. From the jazz side, people like Dizzy Gillespie and Henry Threadgill and Charles McPherson, and I even got to work with the Mills Brothers, believe it or not, in Atlantic City. And then from the Latin side of things, I mentioned Mongo, but Tito Puente, the great legendary Cuban pianist Marco Rizzo, who was the pianist on the I Love Lucy show, and Desi Arnaz's musical director. Candido, the father of modern conga drumming, Paquito de Rivera, Ray Barreto, you name it, Chico Ofari, like, you name it, I've worked with them and recorded with them. So I'm very fortunate. But all that is due to the 3 gentlemen that I mentioned before, my father, Mr. William Ryan, Keith Copeland, and all of the knowledge that I got from the Berklee College of Music. So, and the streets, and my biggest teacher, the streets of New York City.
Hasn't New York taught a whole lot of people a lot of different things?
Oh, yeah, because we're a city of immigrants. So all those cultures are happening. And if you come in contact with them, all you got to do is ride the subway. And now
tell me about your radio show on is it WBGO?
Yes, my radio show is called The Latin Jazz Cruise. It's on from 4 to 6 every Saturday. And I encourage everybody to listen to it if you want to learn about the music, because I impart knowledge. I just don't announce who's playing. I talk about the rhythms, the history of the music, some of the background, maybe how the composer got to write the song, etc. And I cover the whole spectrum of the Latin jazz continuum. Yeah.
Do they not only broadcast in the New York area, but do they stream also?
Yes, they stream, and you don't have to listen live to the show. Because you're doing something, you're occupied at the time, you can listen in the archive. Just type in WBGO Latin Jazz Cruise, CRUISE, and the archive will pop up in the last 2 weeks of shows. You'll be able to hear them.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. Now, tell us, I understand that you have a new album out.
Yes, this is, we're very proud of it because it's a departure from our previous albums. This is with my Multiverse Big Band. We're very proud because all of our albums have been nominated for Grammys, starting 25 years ago with an album called Live in Enclave, which was recorded live at Birdland in New York City. That was nominated for a Grammy. Then Big Band Urban Folktales, that was nominated for a Grammy. Then Multiverse, that was nominated for 2 Grammys. Then after that, West Side Story Reimagined, that was nominated for a Grammy and also for Album of the Year. It wasn't nominated, it was named Album of the Year by the Jazz Journalists Association. And I've done other albums, big band albums like 50 Years of Mambo, where I was the co-musical director. That was a tribute to Damaso Perez Prado, the great Cuban pianist. That was nominated for a Grammy. There was 2 albums I did with my students at the Manhattan School of Music, Tito Puente Masterworks Live and Kenya Revisited Live. Those were nominated for Grammys. And now this new one, Vox Urbana, has just been nominated for Best Latin Jazz Album for 2024. We'll find out on February 4th. And it's a departure because on all my albums, I've included some vocals, but this album is completely dedicated to vocals, hence the name Vox Humana, human voice. And it features 3 of the most incredible contemporary jazz vocalists living today. Janice Siegel from the Manhattan Transfer, who's won 10 Grammys. Antoinette Montague, who's a blues and jazz powerhouse. And a young, talented woman of Dominican, Puerto Rican descent from the Bronx like me, Jennifer J. Ledesma, who can sing in 11 languages, speaks 4 languages, and on this album sings in 3 languages. So we're very happy. It was recorded live at Dizzy's Club Coca-Cola. I'm very proud of the musicians because recording a live album is a dangerous thing, and the musicians just knocked it out of the park.
I was trying to think of, did you do a live album? Because I came to see you at Dizzy's Club one time, and it seemed like the same lineup that you're talking about was there, but I don't know whether that was the live album or not.
You might have come seen us when we recorded West Side Story Reimagined, which was, we did all of the music of the show, West Side Story, but with Afro-Latin rhythms. But when was the last time you saw us? Do you remember what year it was, or if it was last year? Or...
It was last year.
Oh, so then you're on the album. You're on a Grammy-nominated album. You're in the audience cheering and applauding. So there you go.
I must tell you, I have a whole lot more questions, but I have come to that time where I have to end. But I so much appreciated you being on this show. I really appreciate it, and I thank you so much for doing this show. I want people to go out and buy that album.
Yes, it's available.
Your town, go to see him because you have a master in front of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's available on all platforms, so you can get it in. It's a double CD set as well. Hopefully, we'll bring the Grammy back to New York City on February 4th, especially, in particular, the Bronx.
said it was love. I love you, don't let him take me. I'm a genie in a bottle, you got to rub me the right way. Love is kind of crazy with a spooky little boy like you. Spooky.
África te llama y te invita. Mi Congo, Puerto Rico, ay. Oye, que viva Puerto Rico.
Samara Joy brought it to the North Bronx last year. We're going to bring it to the South Bronx.
Okay. That's been our show, the show about stuff, the Stephen Davis Show. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in this week. Hope you enjoyed this show about stuff. See you next time.